All right, strap in, everyone.
Wow.
We're going deep today. We're taking on non-commutative Hodge structures.
Whoa!
Yeah, you sent over some research papers, and I got to say, they're pretty dense. I mean, even a mathematician might need a breather after tackling these formulas. But hey, that's why we do these deep dives, right? To break it all down, figure out what we're even looking at.
Yeah, exactly.
And the big question, of course, why should anyone care about this stuff? Today, we're going to unpack these non-commutative Hodge structures, see what they are, and why they might actually matter outside some, abstract math world.
Well, one of the papers actually gives us a decent starting point. It mentions this usual Hodge theory. It's a good foundation before we jump into the non-commutative stuff.
Okay, so usual Hodge theory, huh? What's that all about?
Think of it like this. It connects different ways of looking at shapes. Imagine you're looking at a sculpture. You can see it, right? Its form. You can trace the edges, the curves, and you can describe it with, mathematical equations. Well, Hodge theory shows us there are hidden relationships between all these, shows how they all reflect the same structure underneath.
So it's like a secret code that connects, different languages, but instead of languages, it's different ways of describing shapes.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And this idea of connecting things that seem different, that's at the heart of this non-commutative Hodge theory, too.
Okay, so let's take that leap then. One of the papers has this pretty intimidating definition. It says, a rational, pure Encke Hodge structure consists of the data, H, E, B, ISO, where H is a Z2-graded algebraic vector bundle on A1. And it keeps going. Can we unpack that little, translate it from, abstract math to something I can actually understand?
Sure. Instead of just a shape, imagine something more complex, like a city. Think of the city as our space. Now, an algebraic vector bundle, it's like we're adding layers of information on top of that city. Stuff like traffic flow, population density, maybe even like the mood of people in different neighborhoods.
So we're not just looking at the layout of the city, we're adding all this extra data. Tells us how it functions.
Exactly. And the Z2 graded part, it means we're organizing this information into two categories, kind of like dividing the city into, say, day and night.
Got it. Okay, I'm starting to get a feel for this. But then things get even more confusing for me. The papers start talking about exponential type Encke Hodge structures. What's exponential about it?
Okay, well, think about how things change as you move through the city. Maybe traffic gets heavier as you get closer to downtown, or the energy shifts from a park to a busy street. These variations, how the data changes as you move through the space, that's what relates to the exponential type.
So it's not just about the information, but how that information changes as you interact with the space.
It's dynamic. Right, and that's important because real-world systems, they're always evolving, always changing.
Okay, we've got this city. It's got layers and layers of information, and that information's changing as we move around. But then things take a really weird turn. We hit non-commutative spaces, NC spaces. What makes a space non-commutative?
This is where things get a little mind-bending. See, in normal geometry, the order you do things in doesn't really matter. Walk a block north, then a block east, same as walking east then north, right? But in these NC spaces, that's not necessarily true.
Wait, so in an NC space, taking different routes could lead to different destinations, even if you start and end at the same place.
Exactly. Imagine our city again, but this time it has one-way streets. If you go the wrong way down a one-way street, you can't just reverse. The order you move in, it matters. The space itself has a direction built in.
Okay, that's helpful. So in an NC space, it's not just where you are, but how you got there. The journey matters.
You got it. And that's why these Encke Hodge structures are so powerful. They give us a way to study these complex systems where order matters. These systems that don't behave like the neat symmetrical spaces we're used to.
All right, I think I'm getting the basic idea of an Encke Hodge structure, but the question I keep coming back to, and I bet our listeners are too, is why build these complex structures? What's the point of all this?
The big question, right. It's all well and good to play with abstract math, but what can we actually do with these Encke Hodge structures?
Yeah, give us this so what?
Well, it turns out they have the potential to help us understand some of the most complex systems in our world. Systems where order and direction play a crucial role.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Like what? What kinds of systems?
Think about the stock market. Buying and selling stocks isn't always commutative. The order you make trades can really impact your profit or loss. Encke Hodge structures could give us a new way to analyze these financial systems, accounting for order and timing.
Interesting. So instead of just looking at the numbers, we could use encalchet structures to analyze the sequence of events, the flow of transactions, get a deeper understanding of how the market actually behaves.
That's the idea. And it goes beyond just finance. Think about quantum physics, where the order of events at the subatomic level can completely change the outcome of experiments. Or social networks, the direction of relationships, the flow of information. These are key to understanding how communities function.
Wow, so we're talking about a whole new way of analyzing complex systems, moving beyond traditional methods that don't always account for order and direction.
Exactly. It's like discovering a new set of lenses. We can suddenly see the world in a totally different light. Patterns and connections that were hidden before are suddenly visible.
This is pretty incredible. I'm definitely hooked now.
Mhm.
But there's one thing that's still bugging me. The papers keep mentioning this mirror symmetry, which sounds like something out of Alice in Wonderland. What is that, and how does it connect to all this?
Ugh, mirror symmetry. It's one of the most fascinating and mind-boggling ideas in math. Imagine you have two totally different shapes, maybe a coffee mug and a donut. Mirror symmetry suggests they could be linked, that there are hidden mathematical connections between them.
Hold on, a coffee mug and a donut.
Yeah.
What could they possibly have in common, mathematically speaking?
It sounds crazy, right? But that's the beauty of it. Mirror symmetry connects things that seem completely different. And with NC Hodge structures, it suggests that certain NC spaces might have mirror partners. These partners would have different geometries, but share the same underlying math.
So it's like looking at two reflections in a funhouse mirror. They look distorted and strange, but they're both reflections of the same thing.
Perfect analogy. And NC Hodge structures give us the math to understand how those reflections are connected.
Okay, so we've got these mind-bending NC spaces, we've got layers of dynamic information, and we've got mirror symmetry linking seemingly unrelated spaces. My head is spinning. Where do we go from here? What else do these papers tell us about NC Hodge structures?
Oh, there's so much more to explore. It just keeps getting more and more interesting.
All right, I'm ready. Let's take a deep breath and dive into the next layer of this rabbit hole. What's next?
Well, one of the papers hints at a connection between NCAD structures and something called co-FTs, cohomological field theories. These are used to describe how systems evolve over time.
Whoa, hold on. We're going from donuts and cities to
Yeah.
co-FTs. What are those, and how do they fit into all of this?
That's a great question, and it takes us to some of the most profound implications of co-FT structures, their potential to unlock the secrets of how systems change and evolve.
Okay, you've definitely got my attention. Let's unpack these co-FTs and see where this journey takes us. Okay, so we're in the realm of co-FTs now, cohomological field theories. You said they help describe how systems evolve over time. Sounds pretty intense. Can you give me a sense of what these co-FTs are about and how they connect to NCAD structures?
Imagine you're not just looking at a snapshot of our city, but watching a time-lapse video. You see how it changes over days, months, years. Co-FTs give us a mathematical way to describe those changes, those transformations over time.
So it's like adding a time dimension to our city. We watch traffic patterns shift, neighborhoods grow, the whole city kind of breathing and pulsing over time.
That's it. And the connection to Enki Hodge structures. Well, it comes when we consider those spaces where order matters, those one-way streets. The journey is as important as the destination, remember?
Right, right. So co-FTs are about understanding how those NK spaces, those systems with a built-in direction, how they change over time.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, because the paper suggests that NCAD Hodge structures might be the key to unlocking the secrets of these co-FTs, revealing how those complex systems are shaped by their non-commutative nature.
Okay, starting to see how the pieces fit together. But the papers also mention this Fukaya category. And honestly, that sounds terrifying. Can you break down what that is and how it's related to all of this?
Think of the Fukaya category as a way to zoom in. We're going microscopic, focusing on the tiny interactions within our city. Instead of just the overall flow of traffic, we're looking at individual cars, their movements, their interactions, how they speed up, slow down, how they affect each other.
So from a bird's eye view of the city, we're now down at street level. All the nitty-gritty details.
Exactly. And the Fukaya category gives us the math to describe those intricate interactions, including the fact that the order they occur in can really change things.
Okay, so Chi-FTs describe the big picture, the system evolving over time. Fukaya category zooms in on the tiny details of how things interact. But where do NT-Hodge structures fit into this?
Well, the paper suggests that Enki-Hodge structures could be the bridge between those two levels. They link the microscopic details of the Fukaya category to the big picture evolution of the co-FTs, like a Rosetta Stone translating between different languages.
Whoa. So NCAD structures help us understand how those small-scale interactions, the ones where order matters, how they scale up and shape the whole system over time.
That's it. It's a profound insight because it tells us that a system's non-commutative nature, those one-way streets that determine the flow, they're fundamentally connected to how that system evolves.
This is amazing. I see how Enki-Hodge structures could change how we understand complex systems, give us all these new tools. But I have to admit, it's still a little abstract for me. Can you give me a real-world example how these ideas might be applied?
Sure. Think about a biological ecosystem. A forest, for example, with all those relationships between plants, animals, fungi, each interaction, a bee pollinating a flower, a predator hunting, a fungus decomposing. It's like a one-way street. The order matters.
Right, because a bee can't pollinate a flower that's already been eaten, and a predator can't hunt prey that's already decomposed. That sequence is crucial.
Exactly. Now imagine trying to model how that ecosystem evolves. We need to think about the individual interactions and how they affect the whole system.
So we need to understand how those tiny non-commutative interactions, the bee, the flower, the deer, the fungi, how they shape the whole forest over time. That's where COFETs come in.
You got it. And NC-Hodge structures could be the link between them. The math that helps us analyze how the order of those tiny interactions drives the entire ecosystem's evolution.
This is so cool. It's like using math to zoom in on the tiniest details of life in the forest, then zooming out to see how the whole thing changes over time. But I have a question. How do we actually apply this stuff? It still seems pretty theoretical.
Great question. It's about how we turn abstract math into practical tools, right? One key is developing computational methods that can actually handle NC-Hodge structures and apply them to real data.
So we need algorithms and software that can see the data through the lens of NC-Hodge structures, taking into account all those one-way streets and how they shape the system.
Exactly, and there's a lot of really cool work happening in this area. People are using tools from computational topology, algebraic geometry, data science. The goal is to build software that can do for NC-Hodge structures what GPS navigation does for normal geometry. Guide us through those complex spaces and help us understand how they work.
That's a great analogy, a mathematical GPS for navigating the world of non-commutative systems. What are the challenges in building those tools? What are researchers struggling with?
One of the biggest is just the sheer computational complexity of these entity spaces. They can be so much more complex than the spaces we're used to dealing with. The math gets really intense.
So we need better computers, better algorithms, new ways of even thinking about how to analyze these structures.
Exactly. That's why this area is so exciting. It's pushing the boundaries of math and computer science, forcing us to invent new tools and approaches.
Okay, I'm starting to see the scope of the challenge, but also the huge potential. Feels like we're on the verge of a breakthrough in how we understand complex systems. But there's one more thing from the papers that I'm stuck on. A model and B model Hodge structures. What are those, and how do they fit into all this?
That takes us back to mirror symmetry. Remember how we talked about NC spaces having mirror partners, different geometries, but the same underlying math?
Yeah, like our coffee mug and donut, two different shapes connected by some hidden math.
Right. Well, A model and B model Hodge structures are like two different ways of looking at those mirror partners. They each give us a different perspective on the space, capturing different aspects of its math.
So like looking at the coffee mug and donut through two different lenses. One might focus on the curves, the other on the number of holes.
Perfect. And the cool thing is, mirror symmetry suggests that those two perspectives are actually connected. There's a hidden dictionary that translates between the language of the A model and the B model. We get insights from both sides of the mirror.
Okay, so A model and B model Hodge structures are like two sides of the same coin. Two ways of understanding the same math. But how does that connect to understanding real-world systems?
That's where it gets really interesting. The paper suggests that A model and B model Hodge structures could be incredibly useful for analyzing real-world systems, especially those with this non-commutative nature.
But how do we apply them to something concrete, like our forest example? How do they help us understand the dynamics of a forest?
Imagine we're studying how a disease spreads through the forest. From the A model view, we might look at the physical pathways of transmission, how it moves through air, water, soil, how it spreads from tree to tree, how geographical features affect it.
So the A model is like a map of the terrain, showing how the disease moves through the landscape.
Exactly. Now, the B model takes a different approach. It might look at the genetic makeup of the disease, how it evolves, how it interacts with the immune systems of different species.
So the B model is like a genetic blueprint, showing the disease's inner workings and how it adapts.
Precisely. And here's the amazing part. Mirror symmetry suggests that those two seemingly different views, the physical spread and the genetic makeup, are somehow connected.
Hold on, are you saying the way a disease spreads physically is linked to its genes? How is that even possible?
That's the magic of mirror symmetry. It tells us that seemingly unrelated parts of a system can be deeply connected. And Hodge structures give us the math to understand those connections.
Okay, this is blowing my mind. Way beyond high school geometry. But how do we use this mirror symmetry idea? How do A-model and B-model Hodge structures actually help us fight a disease or understand any complex system?
That's the big question, and researchers are working on it. One key idea is that by understanding those connections between the A model and B model, we can get a much deeper understanding of the whole system.
So it's like having two maps of the same area. By comparing them, seeing how they overlap and where they differ, we get a more complete picture.
Exactly. And that deeper understanding leads to new insights, new strategies, new solutions.
This is incredible, but I gotta be honest, it's a bit overwhelming too. We've covered so much, from donuts and cities to Fukaya categories and co-FTs to A-model and B-model Hodge structures. Where do we even start to wrap our heads around all of this?
That's what's so cool about this field. It's a journey of discovery, always more to explore. But I think one of the biggest takeaways is that Hodge structures give us powerful new tools to understand complex systems, systems that break the rules of our old ways of thinking.
It's like we're entering a whole new era of math. The old rules don't apply, and there are all these possibilities opening up.
Exactly. Who knows what amazing discoveries are waiting for us as we explore this world of non-commutative geometry and its implications for understanding the universe.
I'm ready to keep going. What else do these papers reveal about Hodge structures?
Okay, so we've gone deep into the theory of these Hodge structures. We've talked about COVATs, the Fukaya category, even mirror symmetry. But you mentioned there's a more practical side to this too. Can we bring this back down to earth, like real-world applications?
Absolutely. Actually, one area where Hodge structures are showing promise is in data analysis.
Data analysis. That sounds a bit more down to earth than, bending space and time or whatever. How does this connect to the data we see every day? The messy real-world stuff.
Think about the data from a social network, like Twitter. It's all connections, right? People following each other, retweeting, replying. But those connections aren't symmetrical. Just because you follow someone doesn't mean they follow you back. All right, it's a one-way street. Non-commutativity in action. But how do Hodge structures help us make sense of that kind of data?
Well, a lot of the traditional tools for data analysis, they kind of struggle with that asymmetry. They're built on ideas of symmetry and balance, which don't always hold true in the real world, especially with social networks.
So it's like using the wrong tool for the job.
Yeah, exactly. But Hodge structures, they're built to handle non-commutativity. They can see those directed networks in a way traditional methods can't. Give us new ways to spot patterns and connections in the data.
Okay, I'm curious. Can you give me an example? How would this work in practice?
Let's say we're analyzing a network of political blogs. We can represent that as a directed graph. Each blog is a node, and the links show connections from one blog to another.
Got it. So if blog A links to blog B, we draw an arrow from A to B to show the direction.
Exactly. And then we apply Hodge Theory to this graph. We calculate these things called algebraic invariants that capture that non-commutative structure.
Algebraic invariants. Sounds complicated. What do those tell us?
Think of them like mathematical fingerprints. They reveal the hidden patterns in the network. Things like how influential different blogs are, how information flows, maybe even if there are echo chambers or clusters of blogs reinforcing each other's views.
So we're using Hodge Theory to see the network's hidden anatomy, the structures that shape how it works.
That's a great way to put it. These invariants give us a much deeper understanding than just looking at the raw connections.
This is so cool. And this could go way beyond just social networks, right? Any kind of directed network could be analyzed this way.
Absolutely. People are using Hodge Theory to study all sorts of complex systems. Biological networks, like the interactions between genes, proteins, cells, transportation networks, analyzing traffic flow or global supply chains. Even financial networks, tracking money or identifying risks.
Wow, it's like a universal language for understanding complexity, decoding those hidden patterns that make systems tick. But I do have to ask, what about the ethics of this? If we can analyze social networks this way, spot influential people or echo chambers, couldn't that be used for bad stuff, like manipulation or propaganda?
That's a really important point. It's about responsible innovation. Any powerful tool can be used for good or bad. It's on us, as researchers and as a society, to make sure these tools are used ethically.
Right, the tool itself isn't good or bad, it's how we use it. We need to think about the consequences and put safeguards in place.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing conversation we need to have as these tools develop. but I believe the potential benefits are huge.
Okay, last question before we wrap up. The papers mentioned a conjecture about Encke-Hodge structures, something about periodic cyclic homology, carrying a natural Encke-Hodge structure. Can you translate that for me? What does it mean, and why is it important?
Ah, that's a good one. It gets to the heart of why Encke-Hodge structures are so powerful, why this field is so exciting. Periodic cyclic homology is a tool, a really sophisticated one, that helps us extract key information from these complex mathematical objects.
So it's like a filter. Gets rid of the noise and shows us the real structure underneath.
Exactly. And the conjecture says that if we use this tool on an NC-Hodge structure, the result still has an NC-Hodge structure. Like, these structures have this resilience, a deep mathematical integrity that stays even when we break them down.
So they're kind of like fractals. Zoom in or out, and you see the same patterns repeating.
I love that. And if this conjecture is true, it would have huge implications. We could apply NC-Hodge theory to even more things, potentially unlocking new insights into quantum field theory, string theory, even the nature of space-time.
I'm telling you, I'm hooked on NC-Hodge theory now. I never thought math could be this fascinating or this far-reaching.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you. And I think this is just the beginning. There's so much more to discover as we delve deeper into these NC-Hodge structures.
Well, huge thanks to you for guiding us through this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more explorations of the most interesting corners of science and math. Until then, keep those brains buzzing.